All rise. You need to put your computer.
Mine?
Yeah.
It is.
No, probably this one.
This one.
Yeah.
You may be seated.
Is that better? I think it's
So turning to the motion for directed verdict. Motion for directed verdict may be granted only when the evidence considered in the light most favorable to the opposing party compels a conclusion that reasonable persons could not disagree as to the evidence or to the inferences which could be drawn from the evidence, and when no evidence has been presented, the state could sustain a verdict against the moving party. The court must consider the evidence and the reasonable inferences from the evidence in the most favorable way to the non-moving party. Here, in this case, I tend to agree with Mr. Kotlachek. Is correct that this would be inappropriate to grant a Rule 50 motion given the expedited proceedings. However, even if it was appropriate, I would deny because the motion brings up significant legal issues, many of which have never been decided by any court. For instance, essentially one of President Trump's arguments is that the First Amendment displaces the 14th Amendment, or at the very least, the court needs to interpret the 14th Amendment with a First Amendment overlay. The petitioners argue that I should apply the 14th Amendment on its face and that it's not subject to or somehow a lesser amendment than the First Amendment. There's clearly a conflict. On the one hand, you have people in the 1800s being disqualified for writing a letter to the editor. Clearly speech. On the other hand, you have a body of law holding the standards for finding incitement are very high, and the speech needs to be very specific. The court is not prepared today to reconcile those two bodies of law. Similarly, on the one hand, Intervener Trump argues the court cannot look at statements that are in a glacial pace to find incitement. However, the petitioners argue that I can look at those statements for context and to infer intent, and a plan for incitement they contend is caused by the January 6th speech. Trump argues that the January 6th speech does not meet the standard of incitement, but then I have Professor Sini stating that based on the relationship that was built, the words were coded. Petitioners argue in the cited cases that the courts will look at the coded language when determining incitement. To be clear, I'm not deciding any of these issues. I'm denying motion for directed verdict because in order to grant a motion for directed verdict, I would have to decide many legal issues that I'm simply not prepared to decide today. Further, I think I would be better informed to decide the legal issues when I have more of a factual context, which I expect I will have after the presentation of Intervener's case. So I will address the First Amendment issues brought up in your motion for directed verdict when I make my final findings of facts, conclusions of law, and all the other legal arguments that I need to decide between now and then. The interveners, I think we were going to start with President Trump. Are they ready to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor, we are. Would you like a quick interview appearance, or is this morning's interview?
Oh, do we have new people that need to enter their appearance?
Yes, we do. So on behalf of President Trump, Mr. Jeffrey Blue will also be here today.
Okay.
And he and Mr. Shaw will be handling our witnesses today.
Oh, I'm sorry, because we heard from Mr. Blue yesterday. You mean just they hadn't entered an appearance today. And then what about, are you calling the witness today that had the issue with the lawyer needing to be?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jesse Denal is on, and I believe he was admitted. It was not clear to me whether he was admitted just by the Supreme Court and waiting for you to admit him, or whether you've already admitted him.
I think that he hadn't filed a motion, but I think he has subsequently filed. He did it in exactly the backwards order. He got approval from the Supreme Court, and then he filed a motion. But I believe that he has been approved by the Supreme Court, and that we have granted the motion.
Okay. So he is on the list.
Okay, and so is he? Is it your very first witness, the one that he's representing the witness himself?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. The witness is going to be on WebEx?
Yes, Your Honor.
You need to turn the screen around so that the court reporter can see the witness speak. Will you call your first witness?
Yes, we would call Kash Patel.
Mr. Patel? Can you hear us? Okay, we're going to need to turn up some volume majorly. I can hear you, but just barely.
I'll endeavor to speak up now.
Okay, so that amount, which you probably thought was shouting, was just about the perfect amount, so definitely speak up.
Will do.
Did you want to swear the witness
Sure.
in?
Can you raise your right hand? Do you swear, under the penalty of perjury, that the testimony you will give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Great.
Mr. Patel, thank you for interrupting your visit with your family to be with us today. Let's briefly discuss your background. Am I correct that you're a recovering lawyer?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you for letting me appear remotely. I really appreciate the accommodation. I have not practiced law in any close to a decade.
Well, did you ever practice? Well, obviously you imply you did. When did you practice law?
When I first graduated law school in 2005, I served as an assistant public defender in Fort Miami-Dade County, and later went on to serve as an assistant federal public defender for the Southern District of Florida. And thereafter, I transitioned to the Department of Justice's National Security Division, where I served as a terrorism prosecutor, and served one more counsel role thereafter on Capitol Hill.
Okay. And when you were at the Department of Justice, did you also serve as a legal liaison to the Department of Defense?
Yeah, my duties while being a terrorism prosecutor, I was the selected representative to be the DOJ liaison to the Joint Special Operations Command and investigate special forces units to work on collaborative global targeting operations.
So is there any way to get him to be a little bit louder without making him doing whatever he just did?
That's what I was trying to do, Your Honor, and it doesn't seem as if I'm able to without the feedback.
So, Mr. Patel, if you can just kind of lean in, that'd be good. I can hear you, but it's kind of going in and out.
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect.
Okay. How long were you at the Department of Justice?
Approximately 4 years.
And when did you leave the Department of Justice?
When I left the Department of Justice, I went on to serve as senior counsel and national security advisor to the House Permanent Select Committee at the United States Congress, where my duties were to run the counterterrorism platform oversight operations and also serve as the lead chief investigative counsel for the investigation into Russian active measures.
Am I correct in thinking you were with the House from about 2017 to 2019?
Yes, that's correct. Just about early 2019.
Okay. And then where did you go after, or in early 2019?
Thereafter, I transitioned to the White House's National Security Council, and I was shortly after going over to the White House to become the senior director for counterterrorism, where I ran the counterterrorism policy platform for President Trump, along with the hostage portfolio, counter-narcotics, trafficking and trafficking, and a slew of other counterterrorism-related matters.
Okay. And how long did you stay in that position?
On and off for 2 years, over 2 years. The role was broken up by one temporary duty assignment where I served as a deputy director of national intelligence over at the Office of the Directorate of National Intelligence, where our duties were to oversee the 17 intelligence company organizations, along with providing presidential daily briefing to the president's cabinet. I returned to the White House after 4 or 5 months at ODNI, and I will finish the administration's term as chief of staff over at the Department of Defense.
And who were you supporting as chief of staff?
At the time, it was Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher C. Miller.
And when did you finish up your term as chief of staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense?
We both had our terms expire on January 20th, 2021 at 9 noon.
Okay. And what do you do now?
I have multiple roles. I'm a consultant. I have a national security practice. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Renewing America and National Security. I serve on the board of TMTG Technology Company. I'm a senior advisor to President Trump for National Security, Defense, and Intel. And I also have a 501c3 charity where I serve as the president of the Kash Foundation, where we have multiple lines of efforts giving away money to those in need.
Okay. I'd like to focus on your time as chief of staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense. And I'd like to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 1027, which I believe is either already in or has not been objected to. Is there any objection to that?
I believe it's in, but there's no objection.
Okay.
1027 is admitted, it hasn't already been.
Okay. Could you put that up, please, Joanna?
Just need my screen shared. Colin, can you let me in?
Okay. Looking, can you see exhibit 1027, sir?
I don't think so.
I can't see it either.
There we go.
Now I see it.
Okay, great. If you need it to be scrolled, just let us know. But do you know what that document is?
It's a part of one of the Department of Defense's timelines we created encapsulating our involvement in and around the events of January 6, 2021.
Okay. If you would look at the third bullet point under the heading Sunday, January 3rd, 2021, okay, it reads, A/SD and CJCS meet with the President. President concurs in the activation of DCNG to support law enforcement. Do you see that?
Yes, it is.
What does the abbreviation A/SD stand for in DoD parlance?
Acting Secretary of Defense.
And that would be Acting Secretary of Defense Miller, for whom you were working at the time?
Yes.
What about CJCS?
the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and at the time it was Chairman Mark Miller.
And what do you understand DCNG to mean?
That is the abbreviation for the Washington, D.C. National Guard Bureau. Every state has its own National Guard. It's the federal complex. They have their own National Guard.
Okay. So what do you understand this entry to be conveying?
We had a meeting at the White House, as indicated by the timeline, on January 3rd, about events wholly unrelated to this, regarding national security. And at that meeting, President Trump brought up the possibility of utilizing National Guard forces for the upcoming voting confirmation process, and that bullet point refers to his authorization, which we captured in this timeline.
And the purpose of that to support local authorities and law enforcement?
The purpose of National Guard has always been, my understanding, is to support local law enforcement when a request is made through their chain of command, which would be the governor or the mayors of Washington, D.C., or the Capitol Police Chiefs, since we're talking about the Capitol building itself and those grounds in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Now, I'd like to show you Exhibit 1031, which has also been previously admitted. So, Joanna, if you could put that up, and let's start with the cover page. Sir, do you recognize this as the November 16th, 2021 report of the Department of Defense Inspector General regarding his review of the Department of Defense's role, responsibilities, and actions to prepare for and respond to the protests and its aftermath at the U.S. Capitol campus on January 6, 2021?
I do.
Okay. And since it was prepared November 16th, 2021, that would have been during the Biden administration, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Were you interviewed for that report?
I was not.
Okay. All right. Joanna, if you could put up page 15 now, please. It's actually the numbered page 15, so it may be different than the 15 in the document. There you go. Thank you. So let me direct your attention to Table 1, which starts on page 15, and then we'll carry on to page 16, which we'll get to in a minute. Do you recognize that as a chronology of significant events leading up to January 6th?
Yes, in general.
Okay. And let me direct your attention to the second entry for December 31st, 2020. Do you see that entry?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Does it discuss a DC RFA to the DCNG for January 5th through 6th, 2021 for, and I'm paraphrasing, traffic control and crowd control at metro stations and response capability?
Yes, I see that. That's what's reflected there.
Could you please explain what you understand that entry to mean?
An RFA is a request for assistance, which is the formal verbiage when an appropriate level officer or secretary submits a request for National Guard assistance. And as is documented here, that RFA went specifically to the Washington, D.C. National Guard for the very specific duties of performing traffic control at intersections and crowd control at metro stations. When the requests for National Guard are provided, they are also, as is notified here, granted with specificity as to what they're requesting, not just generally people. And that's encapsulated by this bullet point here. And M.G. Walker, at the time, was Major General Walker, the head of the Washington, D.C. National Guard. Mr. McCarthy was the Secretary of the Army at the time. The Secretary of the Army controls the entire National Guard board structure for the United States of America.
And this RFA, or request for assistance, was that coming from the D.C. local government?
Yeah, that's what all those letters stand for.
So if I understand that correctly, the D.C. local government was requesting a limited number of D.C. National Guard members. Is your recollection about 340? Is that right?
Specifically, it was 346. The request came in through Mayor Bowser's office, who was Mayor of Washington, D.C. at the time. And the specific request was not just with numbers, but what their assistance was to be utilized for, which was our practice when receiving a request. We needed to know how to arm, kit, and man our troops. And in this instance, they would not be armed. If I recall correctly, they would be wearing a bright yellow vest and assisting in traffic duties and possibly wearing protective gear, but that would be about it for my recollection.
Now, if you could switch to page 16, Joanna. And I would direct your attention to the second entry for January 3rd, 2021, sir. And that entry reads, Mr. Miller and General Milley attend a White House meeting. At the end of the meeting, the president asks about election protest preparations, and Mr. Miller tells him, quotes, "We've got a plan, and we've got it covered." Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you understand that to be the same January 3rd meeting discussed in the Department of Defense timeline we reviewed a few minutes ago?
One and the same.
And did you attend that meeting?
I did.
Okay. Did you attend in your capacity as the acting secretary as chief of staff?
I did.
Was it common practice for you to attend meetings at the White House when the acting secretary attended?
Almost everyone.
Do you remember where that meeting took place?
In the Oval Office?
Can you tell us what was discussed at that meeting?
Mostly no, because it was involving a matter of national security that I'm not going to discuss here, but it had nothing to do with these events. And then at the back end, as this timeline notates, there was a discussion briefly about National Guard forces and the upcoming protests.
And so, according to the timeline we just looked at, the acting secretary told the president, "We've got a plan and we've got it covered." Was there any other or any further detail discussed at that meeting?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly the verbiage, but having, as you walk through prior to January 3rd, specifically on December 30th and 31st, request for National Guard coming in, our practice under the law, as we understood it, was we needed presidential authorizations for it. During this conversation, the President authorized 10 to 20,000 National Guardsmen and women to be utilized if necessary around the country to provide assistance to local law enforcement.
So, as of that January 3rd meeting, was there any doubt in your mind that the President was on board with DOD using whatever National Guard resources were needed in its discretion?
Objection.
Oh, he authorized it.
Sustained. Why don't you ask the question again, please?
Sure.
And Mr. Patel, you need to, before answering, if there's been an objection, which you may not have heard, you need to let me rule, okay?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't hear that. Okay.
Yeah, I think you need to, in order for him to hear your objection, you're going to have to move the speaker over so he can.
Mike, she means. Did you have any doubt, as you left that January 3rd meeting, that the President was on board with DOD using whatever National Guard resources were needed in its discretion?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained. Try again.
At the conclusion of that January 3rd meeting, what was your impression of the President's position on the use of the National Guard?
Objection. Objection calls for speculation as to the President's intent.
He can respond to the extent he had an impression. Objection overruled.
My understanding from that meeting was that the President had authorized the National Guard troops we needed, and under the laws we understood it for National Guard purposes, we had step one of a two-step process. And so we had everything we needed, because it's what we do all the time, to go execute step two of the plan while leaving, which is why Secretary of Defense Chris Miller said, we've got a plan and we've got it covered. That's what we do. We do reps and sets.
To your knowledge, did anyone at DOD over the coming days, or certainly, let me strike that. To your knowledge, did anyone in DOD leadership over the coming days ever suggest that more or different authority was needed from President Trump in order to utilize the National Guard troops?
Objection. Explanation.
I asked about his knowledge, Your Honor.
Overruled. You can answer if you want to answer.
Under our practice, we would consult with the Office of the General Counsel at the Department of Defense, along with the White House Counsel's Office, for any legal requirements we might need. But from my perspective, and my conversation with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman and the Secretary of the Army, we had what we needed to initiate under the law the first in the 0, 1, 2, 3 phases, as we call them, for the employment, deployment, and activation of the National Guard.
At that meeting, did you understand President Trump to have limited DOD's authority to deploy National Guard troops in support of the civil authorities in any way?
No, just that the number was 10 to 20,000, so if by chance we needed more, we would have gone back to the Commander in Chief.
Let's go back to Exhibit 1031, page 16, which I think we were already on. And let me direct you to the third entry from the bottom, which reads, January 5th, 2021. I'm sorry. Okay. January 5th, 2021. During the evening, the President calls Mr. Miller to discuss the upcoming rallies. Mr. Miller told us that the President told him to, quote, do what's required to protect the American people. Do you understand that to be referring to deploying National Guard troops?
Yes.
Was there anything else you can think of that might have been referring to?
No, because Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller and I spoke about that conversation, and we
Sustained.
When you and Secretary Miller spoke about that conversation, was it in order to take a course of action?
We didn't need to take a further course of action. We had already implemented our processes under the President's authorization under the law as we operated. And so this was just a presidential statement, but we didn't need it. We had what we needed.
Were detailed operational plans for deployment of the National Guard discussed with the President?
No, I can't think of enough time to be able to do that.
Why not?
While the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the duties through multiple what we call fragos, fragmentary orders and the like, are delegated down to the SecDef, which is the National Command Authority, down to further delegations to the Secretary of the Army. The President we go to the President for authorizations we need to keep him abreast of any issues we think important that rise to his attention, but we have career professionals in place to perform those logistical preparatory works, such as activating the National Guard and running drills.
Between January 3rd and January 6th, were you personally paying attention to the National Guard issue?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, as the individual charged with not just being the Chief of Staff for the Assistant Secretary of Defense, but for the entire Department of Defense and his office, I was directly responsible under the Secretary to ensure any orders he gave were followed. And I was in maybe not every single meeting, but probably close to all of them regarding National Guard forces, their employment, deployment, and activation.
Did you attend meetings with law enforcement agencies at which the topic was discussed?
I think I was at the FBI Washington field office one time with then then Deputy Director Mark McDonough, if I recall correctly.
Were you aware of and following communications with the local authorities about the subject of the National Guard?
What we did, because the Secretary of the Army was our point person, Secretary McCarthy was direct liaison in the field with law enforcement in Mayor Bowser's office. That was our established practice. That was the established practice going back to the summer of 2020 specifically and before that. And that was his job. So there was no need for us to directly engage. We had our appropriate military personnel and their staffs coordinating directly with local law enforcement.
Okay. And so just to close this out, to your knowledge, did any senior DOJ leader ever state in words or substance that they felt they needed more or different authorization from President Trump before they could deploy National Guard troops to keep the peace on January 6th?
No.
Okay, so Department of Defense, based on what you're telling us, felt they had authority to use National Guard troops, and President Trump had been clear that he wanted DOD to do what was necessary to protect the American people. So why didn't we have 10,000 National Guard troops suited up and armed guarding the Capitol in the morning of January 6th?
There's a multitude of reasons, but mainly under the law as the Department of Defense operated under, pursuant to guidance by the Office of General Counsel and the White House Counsel's Office, and probably the last 100 years of National Guard authorities. Step one was a Commander-in-Chief's authorization, which we had. Step two was a request by the governing body, the local governing body, which is usually the governor, but in this instance, it's the mayor since it's Washington, D.C., and or the heads of the Capitol Police Bureau, because we're talking about the Capitol building. Absent those requests, we were under the advisement of our legal counsel's offices that we could not activate the National Guard. We could and did everything we could up to the legal limit to try to begin the processes of getting these folks ready in case that request came in. What I mean by that is people forget the National Guard is very part-time military. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, they're husbands, wives, fathers in the community. We have to go get them. And then after the request is made, we can do that and bring the authorities in that we have in the Office of the Secretary of Defense to bear. Because absent the request, we could not fully launch that process.
Did part of the process involve reaching out to the local authorities to see if they wanted National Guard involvement?
Objection, meeting.
Overruled.
Normally, no. Normally the request would come in. But in this instance, the Secretary and I, along with others, felt this matter was important enough that we ordered the Secretary of the Army, after that authorization came in on January 3rd, to begin engagements with Mayor Bowser and the Capitol Police, who we had already been speaking to on other matters that we discussed here. And we wanted to make them aware that the President authorized 10,000 to 20,000 National Guard, and we wanted to ask them if they had a request. It was a proactive, preemptive measure. If they needed it, we could begin that big lift that is moving thousands of human beings across the country.
And why is, what is your understanding of why DOD is reluctant to deploy National Guard without a request from local authorities?
My understanding is historically how the department has operated is they do not want to deploy uniformed military officers into and around the United States without the appropriate legal authorities, because one of the bedrock principles of having a civilian in charge of the military is that there is no military sort of hijacking of local governmental offices and powers. And I think that's the way, from my understanding, that the Department of Defense has operated its National Guard with that history in mind.
And if the local authorities explicitly tell DOD that they don't want the National Guard deployed, what would DOD's reaction be?
We, under the advice of our General Counsel's Office, the White House Counsel's Office, along with other agencies and departments who all agree that absent a request, we would not move the National Guard process forward, because we, or our lawyers, have made the determination that based on history and law and precedent, that would not be an appropriate maneuver for the department to undertake unilaterally.
So the Secretary of the Army had reached out to local authorities, both in the D.C. government and at the U.S. Capitol Police. What was the response?
I'll paraphrase, but I think the documents have been made public. Mayor Bowser wrote a letter herself, approximately January 4th or 5th, not exactly, declining further requests for National Guard services outside of the 346 National Guard units over its tenure. And as far as the Capitol Police go, it's encapsulated in multiple people's timelines, including testimonies from the chiefs of the Capitol Police and the Capitol Police timeline itself, where the Sergeant-at-Arms declined the Chief of Police's request for National Guard request. And thus, those two were our answers, as we understood it, from the two governing authorities, as far as January 5th and into January 6th, from a timeline perspective.
Okay. Could you put up Exhibit 1028, please? And I believe this is another one to which there's been no objection, but I do not believe it's yet been admitted. So I would like to move that this one be admitted if it hasn't yet been.
No objection.
1028?
1028.
1028 is submitted.
And Mr. Patel, I would ask you if you recognize this letter.
I do.
And what is it?
It's a letter from, excuse me, just scroll down. One second. I just want to confirm at the bottom.
You can scroll down.
Okay, thank you. It's the letter I referenced from Mayor Bowser, I believe on January 5th, to the Department of Defense, which he specifically stated we would not be requesting any additional National Guards men and women. And that was her letter to us. That was the declination of a request. And so we were on standby.
Okay. Did there come a time when the local authorities asked that the National Guard troops be deployed?
When you say local authorities, can I just have clarification? You mean the mayor or line level agents?
If that's an important distinction from your perspective, why don't you explain what you mean?
Sure. We always listen to our operators in the field, our partners in the field, here, police officers, and both at Metropolitan Police Department, which is DC, and the Capitol Police Department. We've known these folks for a long time, worked with them for decades. And so we always have these personal relationships where we're getting our own communications saying, and a lot of those folks said, we'd really like National Guard assistance, but there's a chain of command. And as this letter speaks to the top of the chain of command for the mayor, and conversely, the Capitol Police timeline and the chief's testimony speaks to them, there was a declination by the commanding authorities, respectively, even though the will of the folks who were working on the ground was slightly different.
Okay, well, did there come a time when the commanding authorities for DC, local government, and or the Capitol Police requested National Guard support?
It was on the afternoon of January 6th, and I believe you have a timeline which has some of the delineations specifically.
Well, let's put up that timeline, and you can point us to anything on there that you think is useful. So if you put up page 16 of whatever that, well, actually, which timeline do you want? Do you want the DoD timeline?
There's another one with times on it, but I can. Take the DoD.
Go to the other timeline.
Yeah, the DoD one. Sorry. Just scroll down.
Scroll down to January 6th.
Yeah, there you go. So that is the not everything that happened, of course, but some of the highlights that were happening during the day. And you can see specifically at 14:22 in the afternoon, the Secretary of the Army had a phone call with Mayor Bowser and her deputy mayor and MPD leadership to assess and discuss the current situation on the ground. There's no forthcoming request at that time. And then Mayor Bowser later in that afternoon would make such a request. And as soon as that request was made, it was relayed back to the Office of Secretary of Defense. But we had already preemptively delegated authorities out to expedite the process. But what most people don't understand is we can't just have thousands of men and women ready immediately to deploy and employ and activate. So once we got that go, we had thankfully already staged to the limit of the law what we could, and so we probably cut the time down by half. And essentially what ended up happening was the fastest cold start of the United States military domestically since World War II. So while we always wish to have done it faster, the timeline in which we did it was pretty amazing, given what the men and women had to do on the ground.
Some people now say that the National Guard should have been deployed earlier. Was any delay in deploying the National Guard attributable, in your mind, to a need for additional or different authority from President Trump?
No.
Why not?
The president has a piece of it, and we have that piece. And so, as I said, we acted on that piece proactively. Went to the mayor, went to the Capitol Police. We discussed the responses. Monday morning quarterback, of course, we should have gotten those requests earlier. And, things like no-fly fence structures could have been put in ahead of time. But those authorities, remember, it's important to note that the head law enforcement authority of the day is DOJ, not the Department of Defense. It should never be the Department of Defense domestically. And then, along with DHS and the Capitol Police, have measures such as no-fly fences that they could have installed. And, I don't know why. Those questions have to be asked of them.
Okay, and given President Trump's statement to Acting Secretary Miller the evening before that he should do what's required to protect the American people, was there any doubt in your mind about what President Trump wanted done?
Sustained.
Given that statement, were you uncertain about what needed to be done or what President Trump wanted done?
No, I knew exactly what needed to be done, and we did.
Was there, to your knowledge, any uncertainty among DoD leadership about what the president wanted done?
No.
Did anyone in senior DoD leadership or anyone at all at DoD, to your knowledge, convey to the president any request that afternoon for more or additional authority or authorization, or say there was a problem that required his attention to get National Guard troops deployed?
To my knowledge, no, but we wouldn't have needed to have done that. We had 20,000 authorizations, so anything inside of the numbers count for 20,000. Just to give you an example, the DC National Guard comprised of 2,500 soldiers, give or take 50. So we would bring in the rest from other regions of the country. But even the amount of soldiers we put into Washington, D.C., it was the largest uniform occupation of D.C. since the Civil War. So I didn't think we were going to go up 20,000.
Did you testify before the January 6th Select Committee?
I did.
Were you questioned in a public hearing?
No, they declined my request for a public hearing.
What sort of hearing were you questioned in?
What we call closed door, attorneys, members of the committee, my counsel, that's it.
Was your testimony public when given?
No.
Did you tell them what you told us today about the President and the deployment of National Guard troops?
I believe so.
Did the committee ever call you to testify about those issues in public session?
No.
Did you ever review the committee's final report?
Yeah, in large part, but not, I would say. I don't think I could say it. I read every single page.
Okay. Did you look to see if you were mentioned in the report?
With me and my counsel, a little background, we had an agreement with the committee that my testimony, since I was the first individual subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, we felt it appropriate that the transcript should be made public at some point. And after months-long negotiations, they refused to do so and published their final report. And to my memory, it had been excluded. And our counsel took that up with the January 6th committee staff as to why the agreement had been violated. And I think on the eve of the dissolution of the committee, my transcript was the last one released.
I have no further questions for you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Patel.
Hello, sir.
I started my career as a federal public defender as well, so. I want to start with the day, January 6th. You were not at the White House on January 6th?
I believe the entirety of the day we were in the Pentagon.
You were at the Department of Defense, correct?
Yes, the Office of the Secretary of Justice.
And you didn't speak with President Trump on January 6th?
Sorry?
You did not speak with President Trump on January 6th?
I don't believe I did.
You did not attempt to reach out to President Trump that day?
I don't recall doing it.
President Trump, to your knowledge, did not try to reach out to you or others at the Department of Defense?
He did not, well, try, I'm not sure, but he may have spoken to other DOD leadership that day.
To your knowledge, though, you have no knowledge of any such communication.
I don't believe so.
You are aware that President Trump knew of the attack on the Capitol by 1:21 p.m. in the afternoon on January 6th, correct?
I'm not really sure when he knew of it. We exchanged communications on it.
Will you review the January 6th report? Is that correct, sir?
Some of it, yes.
And you saw in the January 6th report, finding 315, that the committee found that President Trump knew the attack was underway as of 1:21 p.m. that evening?
Well, that's what the committee found, but that doesn't mean that's what I said.
You have no reason to dispute that, though, do you, sir?
Well, I don't know what you're referencing. Can you show me that piece?
Yes. Can you see my screen or no?
I see you, sir. I don't see.
How about now?
Okay.
You see there, finding, it's actually 3:16. By 1:21 p.m., President Trump was informed that the Capitol was under attack. Do you see that?
I see it.
You have no basis to dispute that, do you, sir?
You're confirming. I was just saying word for it.
And you said you had no communications that you recall with President Trump that day?
As best as I can recall.
And you don't know who President Trump may have spoken to that day, do you?
No.
You don't know, so you can't say that President Trump reached out at any point in time to DHS that day while the Capitol was under attack?
To DHS, like the secretary, or just anyone over there?
To your knowledge, during the attack, President Trump didn't make any calls to DHS, FBI, DOJ, MPD, Capitol Police, correct?
When you say any calls, I'm not sure. If leadership was called, I would have been notified because we would have been on the call.
But leadership was not called. You were not notified of any such call by President Trump to any of those other federal law enforcement authorities.
That I'm aware of.
And during the attack, President Trump didn't attempt, to your knowledge, to speak with Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller?
Maybe there was a phone call, but I'm not sure. We were occupied executing the National Guard.
Sir, you had no basis for saying that there was a call between President Trump and Christopher Miller that day.
I don't know if there was or there wasn't.
Now, there was nothing preventing President Trump from sending out a tweet between 1:21 p.m. and 4:17 p.m. telling supporters who were at the Capitol to go home. Was there?
Objection, Foundation.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your objection.
Objection, Foundation.
I'll rephrase. There's no authority that you're aware of, sir, that would have prevented President Trump from sending out a tweet between 1:21 p.m. and 4:17 p.m. telling the people to go home from the Capitol.
Not being a social media genius, I guess he could tweet.
And you're aware of no authority that would prevent him from doing that, correct?
No, but I'm not the leader.
Well, you testified earlier a little bit about the history of the Department of Defense and how they utilize the D.C. National Guard. And you said, I wrote it down, all the time and decades they've done it this way. Did you say that?
Yes, that's what the record reflects.
Prior to November 9th, 2020, you had never worked at the Department of Defense.
That's not true.
When did you work at the Department of Defense, sir?
That was my third tour at DOD over my government career.
You had never been in the position of Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense before, had you?
No, I only served that role once.
You had never been responsible for deploying the National Guard.
Prior to what date?
November 9th, 2020.
I had not. Right.
So you were at the Defense Department as Chief of Staff from November 9th, 2020, and that was after the election, correct?
Yes.
That was after the election had been called by media outlets for President Biden, correct?
I think most media had.
And then you stayed at the Department of Defense only until January 20th, 2021, right?
Yes.
So you had less than 3 months in the position Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense, correct?
Yep.
Now I want to talk about your testimony about 10 to 20,000 troops being authorized. You testified during direct that you attended a meeting in the Oval Office on, you say now, January 3rd, where President Trump, you say, authorized 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops. Is that right?
Yeah, it's about January 3rd. I think the timeline's accurate.
And then you said, you also testified that after the meeting, DOD, somebody reached out to Mayor Bowser and Capitol Police saying, we've got all these people we can deploy. Do you want them?
That would have been the Secretary of the Army. Yeah.
So you didn't do that, did you?
No, we gave the instruction.
You didn't witness the Secretary of the Army do that, did you?
Witness him do what, sorry?
Reach out to anybody at the Mayor's office or the Capitol Police?
No, I didn't witness him. He went and then reported back to us.
He reported back to you that he actually had talked to them.
Yeah, that's how the chain of command works.
Finally, you testified that Mayor Bowser and the Capitol Police rejected the offer, and you point to that January 5th letter, right?
For Mayor Bowser, yes.
I want to dig into each one of those, first starting with the meeting where you say 10 to 20,000 troops were authorized. And you said definitively that it was on January 3rd. I think you even pointed to a bullet point at one point saying it was January 3rd. Is that correct?
Yeah, the time.
Well, let's pull that up. And this is Exhibit 1027. This is the timeline?
Yep.
And you pointed to that third bullet on January 3rd, correct?
I think counsel did, yeah, for sure.
And you've already testified that you provided testimony, and it was deposition testimony to the January 6th committee?
Yes.
That was under oath?
Yeah.
Much closer in time to the actual events than we are here today?
Yeah.
And you actually brought with you to that deposition the DOD timeline. You remember that?
Well, there's multiple DOD timelines that I brought, yes.
Yes, but this was one of them, and you brought another one too, correct?
At least one of them, yes.
And you remember you were asked about when a meeting when a meeting took place where you said that 10 to 20,000 troops were authorized?
Right, yeah.
Do you remember what you said?
I'll try my head.
I want to take you to page 43 of your deposition and go to line 12.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go to 38. Go to line 2,
Yep.
and you're discussing there an article from Vanity Fair, is that right?
They were asking about it.
And according to the article, we're going to provide any National Guard support that the district requests. Miller responded. And Trump goes, you're going to need 10,000 people. No, I'm not talking bullshit. He said that. And then you answer, oh, so you remember stuff like that? So going off just memory, and we can go back to the article when you bring it up, there was a meeting with the President of the United States, Acting Secretary Miller, and some others. And then you couldn't even remember who else was at the meeting, could you?
I could definitively tell you, as I did then, what cabinet officers were there. I thought that was the important thing.
Yeah, but I think you talked about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being there earlier today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were asked these questions in your deposition. Did you remember the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff even being at that meeting?
Yeah.
No. What does it say here? And some others I can't recall off the top of my head.
So you're specifically pointing to a line of questioning about the article. The article doesn't encapsulate the broadness of your question. I specifically stated at least 5 other times in that deposition that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was present along with the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff of the President of the United States, myself, the White House counsel, and others.
Let's go to page 43 of your deposition. Line 12. Do you remember if General Milley was at that conversation? Sorry, which one? The January 5th, this conversation regarding the 10,000 troops. To the best of my memory, we usually were in those Oval Office meetings with a number of folks, so it was, he could have been, I just don't recall. Were you asked that question and did you give that answer?
Yeah, for a January 5th meeting.
So you're saying that there was a January 3rd meeting and a January 5th meeting now where 10,000 to 20,000 troops were discussed?
No, I'm saying there was multiple meetings in the Oval Office during that week and before, and this individual was reading again from either article or AP pick. As I said in the previous stuff you showed me, I said specifically January 4th, or 3rd, or 5th. At that time, that was the best I could recall.
So you had the timeline then. This was at the end of 2021. You were talking about dates. You couldn't remember whether it was the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and now you're saying definitively it was the 3rd that corresponds to that bullet point.
I'm saying there was a meeting on the 3rd definitively. I'm saying you can't correspond it to a specific bullet point because you're citing media articles that this prosecutor was asking me about at a specific time and setting.
I want to go back to the timeline, sir. There's no mention of 10 to 20,000 troops anywhere in that timeline, is there?
No.
There's no mention of 10 to 20,000 troops anywhere in that IG report you discussed, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, you looked through it both before your deposition and presumably today, no?
I looked through some of the timeline. I didn't read the entire 600-page IG report.
Well, you think your lawyers or the people asking you questions would have looked for that if it were in there?
You can ask them.
They didn't ask you about that, though, did they?
I'm not going to tell you what I talked to my lawyer about.
Okay, now, well, Mr. Trump's lawyers are not your lawyers, right?
No.
Did you prepare with them?
I prepared with my counsel.
You didn't talk to them at all?
Past my discussions with them.
So let's look at that 3rd bullet point, January 3rd, 2021. You say that that bullet point, President concurs in activation of the D.C. National Guard to support law enforcement. That refers to 10 to 20,000 troops.
In part, yeah.
Well, you know that the D.C. National Guard doesn't have 10 to 20,000 troops.
Right. Thank you for making my point.
Yeah, and it says the activation of the D.C. National Guard, not other National Guard units, correct?
Yeah.
And there was a request, though, that had come in on December 31st, as you can see in that timeline, for D.C. National Guard assistance, right?
346 people for traffic control.
Traffic control, and there was a 40-person quick reaction force as well, right?
Yeah, critical stage off site.
And that's mentioned on December 31st, 2020, that entry, the request.
I don't see the QR up in this timeline, but if it's there in different places, there.
And you see then that January 3rd, after that, refers to the President concurring in the activation of the D.C. National Guard, and the 340 troops and 40 quick reaction force would have been with the D.C. National Guard.
Yeah.
And then January 4th, it talks about 340 troops and a quick reaction force as well. You see that? No mention of 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops.
No.
Now, is there any documentation anywhere that you can point to at all, official documentation, saying that 10 to 20,000 troops were authorized?
I don't have it on me, but it's in the internal DoD memorandum delegating authorities to the Secretary of the Army, the D.C. National Guard, and our adjutant generals and the Major General in charge of the entire National Guard force. I don't have it.
Where is that document, sir?
It's not one document. There, the Department of Defense.
And was that produced to the January 6th committee?
I asked them to get it. They didn't get it.
You've seen no public documentation anywhere at any point in time that's out and available to the public that says 10 to 20,000 troops were authorized.
You say documentation by whom?
By anyone.
I've seen lots of media articles saying that is exactly what happened.
Well, you've seen media articles quoting yourself, sir.
I'm not the only one they quote. You asked the question if I've seen it in anyone anywhere. I've seen it with dozens of people in scores of articles.
Do you have any of those articles on you, sir?
Oh, yeah, you can look it up.
Now, you remember the Vanity Fair article we talked about?
In part.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 292. Do you see that article there, sir?
Yes, sir.
Is that the Vanity Fair article?
Yeah, I think word by can. It's kind of like,
Objection, Your Honor. This was not timely disclosed to us as a cross-examination exhibit.
I believe it was. We have it marked as an exhibit.
This was not on the list given to us by the deadline on Sunday. We received it this morning, apparently.
Well, you all have supplemented the exhibit list quite a number of times shortly before. So
I think this is where we should overruled.
now there was a reporter from Vanity Fair who was actually embedded with you all for some period of time in the transition.
Yeah.
And that reporter then wrote an article that was published shortly after the Biden administration took over. Is that right?
I'll let the article look later.
And there's a discussion of when there was a meeting where you say 10 to 20,000 people were authorized, January 5th.
That's what it says Christopher Miller said, according to them.
Yeah, and you read that article and you didn't correct them at all, did you?
I didn't read the article.
When the Vanity Fair article came out with your name in it about you, with a guy embedded, you didn't read the Vanity Fair article?
I had my office of communications read the article, but we get 1,000 articles a day. No, I can't read them all, sorry.
You get 1,000 articles a day about you from Vanity Fair.
Not me, but I'm not the important part. I've got bigger functions to do at the Department of Defense, like Operation Warp Speed, the No Fail Mission, withdrawing out of Afghanistan, saving American hostages, and securing our border. I don't care what Vanity Fair says.
Well, sir, to be fair, we're not at the Department of Defense when the Vanity Fair article came out.
No, you keep showing me a piece of the article. I have no idea when it came out.
Well, the reason January 5th is kind of important is Mayor Bowser sent her letter on the 5th, didn't she?
Okay.
And you say that there was this meeting where stuff was authorized, 10 to 20,000 troops, there's no record of it. You then, somebody went from the Department of Defense to Mayor Bowser's office, to the Capitol Police, requesting if they need some assistance, and then on January 5th, Mayor Bowser writes a letter back. Right?
You say there's no record of it, but okay.
Okay. Writes a letter back on January 5th. Do you know what time of day she wrote that letter back, sir? Let's look at Exhibit 1031. In the DOD IG report, it says that she wrote the letter at 2:27 p.m. You have any reason to dispute that?
No.
And in the Vanity Fair article we just looked at, it said that the evening where you say 10 to 20,000 troops were authorized was in the evening of January 5th?
Objection mischaracterizes the testimony.
Also, it's Christopher Miller.
Hold on. Overruled.
Paragraph you showed me that it was Christopher Miller speaking.
Yeah, and it says on the evening of January 5th?
Right, then it says Miller recalled, Miller said. It doesn't say I said.
So you think Mr. Miller's just talking about a different meeting?
I don't know, you can ask him.
Is there any record, public record, that you've seen documenting a request or an offer from President Trump or the Department of Defense to Mayor Bowser or the Capitol Police of 10 to 20,000 troops?
We would not have made the request. We would have presented them with the authorization, which we did through Secretary of the Army.
And there's no record of that in any of the timelines we looked at, sir? 1031, 1027?
Of Secretary of the Army going there?
Yeah, and offering 10 to 20,000 troops.
I don't know if that's in the timeline or not, but he went there and reported back to us, and that's why we didn't hold us.
There's no record of that, though, in the timeline. Correct, sir?
Yeah, the timeline speaks for itself. But it's not exhaustive. That was never the purpose of the timeline.
So it's not exhaustive, but you put in stuff about 340 troops, but not 10 to 20,000 troops?
No, because at the time, that was the specificity of the numbers that which we had for actual deployment.
Now, you've said that this meeting took place now on January 3rd, maybe it's on January 5th, there's 2 meetings, but you've also been out there talking about how there was a meeting on January 4th, haven't you, sir?
Yeah, as I've said, I testified to the best of my ability. We have a lot going on. If I'm off by a day, sue me. But I'm telling you what happened to the best of my ability. That doesn't change the fact that the authorization came in beforehand. It was relayed to the appropriate officials in D.C. and Capitol Police. It was declined, and we acted when their request finally came in on January 6th. So if you want to argue about me January 3rd, 4th, or 5th, I guess we can keep doing this.
Well, sir, it's kind of important because you're pointing to a timeline and saying it was on January 3rd. Then there's an article saying it was January 5th. Then there's something else saying it's January 4th. You on interviews. And then there's a letter that's sent on January 5th, which you say is a response to a request or an offer from DOD. So the timing does matter, sir.
Objection.
Doesn't it?
Objection. That question mischaracterizes testimony and mischaracterized the article. It was argumentative.
You can reject on all those. Overruled.
It's important to you. That's why you're asking about it.
Do you recall what Secretary Miller said about whether there had been 10,000 troops ordered to be deployed?
were never 10,000 troops ordered to be deployed.
Just authorized.
Right.
But you do recall that Christopher Miller said there was no such order?
I don't understand what you're asking. When would Christopher Miller, as acting Secretary of Defense, be appropriate at the time, saying this statement about an order for 10,000 people?
I'm going to show you the January 6th report. This is page 95 of the report, and there's a finding specifically on this issue. Some have suggested that President Trump gave an order to have 10,000 troops ready for January 6th. The Select Committee found no evidence of this. In fact, President Trump's acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, directly refuted this when he testified under oath. Committee staff, to be crystal clear, there was no direct order from President Trump to put 10,000 troops to be on the ready for January 6th, correct? No, yeah, that's correct. There was no direct order.
That's absolutely right. There was no order because that would have been unlawful as we understood it. There was an authorization. There was a huge difference.
Okay. Now, sir, you're the current, what's your current job for President Trump?
I'm a senior advisor for national defense.
And how long have you been in that position?
About a year.
You're advising President Trump on what he might do during a second administration?
On policy and other matters.
And are you paid by the Trump organization?
No.
Nothing.
The Trump organization is not paying.
Sorry, are you paid by President Trump or any representative of his?
I can work with my counsel on who exactly pays me, but I don't think either of those two are them.
Does any organization affiliated with President Trump currently pay you?
Yes.
What?
It's one of his PACs.
What PAC?
I believe it's Save America.
How much does President Trump's Save America PAC pay you per month?
$15,000.
How much has President Trump's Save America PAC paid you since you began working?
It's maybe a year, maybe just under, so whatever that ends up to be.
Over $200,000?
If it's over a year, yeah, I don't think so. I have to check the math.
And you'd get a position in the second Trump administration, do you think?
I don't know.
Have you discussed that with him?
Not really.
Now, you've written a few books, haven't you?
A children's book and a new book, yes.
And the children's book is actually about President Trump.
Yes.
And what's the name of that book?
The series called Plotting Against the King.
And Trump is the King, King Donald.
Yeah, it takes place in medieval times. It's about Russian aid for kids.
And the first book, the villain is Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
King Trump is accused of being a shifty knight, or accused by a shifty knight of cheating to get the throne. You're in the story, you're a wizard who protects Donald Trump.
I think it's more portrayed as protecting the truth, but sure, it's a children's book. Go for it.
And Trump said he wants to put that book in every school in America.
I think he posted about it, yes, if that's what he's supposed to be.
And you actually have a website, fightwithcash.com.
One of my websites.
And you sell kind of swag on that site.
I do for charitable meetings.
And I just want to look at some of those. And you sell very swag. I think you sell OMB or Orange Man Bad swag there.
Yeah, when you say swag, merchandise.
Merchandise. What does Orange Man Bad stand for?
It's just one of the things you see on the media describing President Trump, so we thought it would be a good way to make money and give away hundreds of thousands of dollars to children and veterans and active duty military in need.
Orange Man Bad refers to liberals who don't like President Trump, right?
I think that's one way. Well, you can tell me, I don't know.
And you wrote another book called Government Gangsters, is that right?
I did.
And Government Gangsters is about your view that there's a cabal or deep state out there that is trying to ruin our country?
Not my view, in the book it's outlined further actions.
And you write the book about the deep state, right?
In part.
Is this proceeding part of the deep state?
No, it's a law enforcement proceeding.
Am I part of the deep state?
I don't know, I don't really know yet.
Is the judge part of the deep state?
I think the judge is beyond reproach. We can.
Frankly, sir, you think that all liberals or liberal leadership are evil, right?
That's outrageous. I work more in the Department of Justice for Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates than I ever did in the Republican administration. We used out wonderful cases in the National Security Administration. I worked as a public defender for 8 years, executing due process. So if you want to make that globalization, because the cameras are on, you can go right ahead. But I don't believe that. That's stupid.
Sorry.
I have to wonder, Kash, if everything I said before about people being too stupid is in fact that the leadership is that stupid.
Of course, the leadership is evil. They're not stupid. There's a distinction. I've worked with all of these people. They are pure evil.
The only thing the Pelosi's and the Schumers and the like care around the world is being glorified in the media. That's it. What's my next headline? What's my next payday? How do I stay on the stock market with my husband? How do I come out on top of these people that husband was basically begging? That is the trap that people come in behind them and say, I don't need that, I don't need that thing. They are evil. That's the problem. You people that follow it? Yes, do it.
And that was you in an interview, sir?
Yeah, talking about specific leadership. Not everybody.
Now, you also serve currently on the board of directors for the Trump Media Group, is that right?
Okay.
And how long have you served in that position?
Probably a year and change, maybe.
And the Trump Media and Technology Group owns and runs Trump's social media platform, True Social.
I think, yeah, Paul.
And how much are you paid as a director on the board of directors for Trump Media and Technology Group?
You're up.
Who else is on that board with you?
You just asked the council that I'm allowed to publicly relate it. I don't know if that is public or not. If I am, I'm going to tell you.
I'll tell you that it's in the Secretary of State filings from Florida.
Okay. If it's public, then it's myself, Dan Scavino, Donald Trump Jr., and I think former President Trump. I think my memory serves me.
And former President Trump is the chairman of the board.
I think that's the title.
Devin Nunes is president and CEO, correct?
Yeah.
How often do y'all meet?
As needed.
When's the last time you met?
The window, I'm not sure.
Now, you had testified on direct that the FBI could have sent troops out to protect the Capitol on January 6th, is that right?
Well, not troops, but 1811 agents. Federal law.
So federal law enforcement officers, right?
Right.
And the FBI reports ultimately up to the president?
The DOJ's Attorney General and to the President.
So up to the president, though?
Well, every cabinet secretary does.
And you're not aware of the president making any phone calls to DOJ to authorize release of the FBI or FBI agents on January 6th?
No, what my concern was that Director Christopher Wray was on other leadership calls, and that DOJ had designated the lead law enforcement agency for January 6th, and was not taking the appropriate preemptive measures to secure Capitol grounds. So we were working internally to try to get them there, but unfortunately they never did. The DOD did not have that primary call.
And Christopher Wray is one of the members of the deep state that you identify in government gangsters, right?
I think Christopher Wray is one of the members as the director of the FBI that he's lying, so yes, in part.
And who are the other members of the deep state that you've identified in government gangsters?
Objection, Your Honor. At some point, it's just irrelevant.
Why don't you move on, Mr. Crimson?
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Does Colorado Republican have any questions?
No, Your Honor, we do not.
Nothing, Secretary.
Okay. Any redirect, Mr. Shaw?
Just a couple of quick questions, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Patel, to your mind, is there anything inconsistent with the president telling you on January 3rd that he thought that he was authorizing 10 to 20,000 troops, and then telling you on January 5th that you're going to need 10,000 troops?
No.
To your understanding, would the Department of Defense typically, when it reaches out to local authorities, offer a specific number of troops, or would it offer to provide what local authorities need?
Well, that's part of the conversation. We would say, here's the cap so far. What are you having in the Super Bowl, the parade, the protest? What are you anticipating? What's the threat analysis? Intelligence landscape, and we work back and forth. And if it superseded that threshold, we'd go back and the appropriate authorization. So those are back and forth.
I don't have any further questions, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Patel, thank you for your testimony today. You're released.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So our next witness is also on WebEx, Your Honor.
Okay.
We just need to get her lined up unless the court wants to take a short break.
Well, is she on standby?
She's locking in right now, Your Honor.
She's logging in right now.
Okay. Let's just release the director. Yeah, let's at least get her started. And who is this witness?
This would be Katrina Pierson, Your Honor. Pierson.
one issue. We've been informed that somebody is live streaming the court proceedings on the internet without permission to record it for including commentary as it goes. They're beyond the scope of who's there. I don't have the precedent, maybe that fiction that they're watching the game without permission might be appropriate.
And we know that they're not part of the expanded media coverage?
Yes, yes.
Do we know what organization it is?
It appears to be an individual, Your Honor, but there were like 7,000 people watching him. It's currently for 8,600. It's Ashley F.
Ashley Depp.
Yeah, EDP.
I need to log you. I think I need to log you
Also,
out. Log you back in.
I want to make it clear that there are very specific statutes and rules in place in the state of Colorado for videotaping proceedings, and there's a process. It only applies to actual media outlets, and you need to request and be granted permission to record any proceedings. So to the extent that there's anybody currently recording proceedings, you are in violation of the court's orders, and if you continue to do so, you will be in further violation of the court's orders.
This one, I have to log you out. Log you back in. It's not working. We don't have video on you from your camera.
Well, I don't care if I show.
It's carrying in.
So I assume you don't mind if I don't show up in the video feed?
That's fine. Is Ms. Pierson on?
Doesn't appear you. She said she is logging in.
Any word on status?
She's trying.
We live in an age of miracles. Okay, I believe she's on the screen.
Do you have a way of making her be the...
Now we're taxing my technological capabilities, so Joanna, do we have a way of keeping her central?
I believe she'll go central once she starts speaking.
Ms. Pierson, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, there we go. Ms. Pierson, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ms. Pierson, would you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I am originally from Texas. I have a biology degree from UT Dallas. I worked in healthcare for about 14 years, wrapping that up as a neuroscience administrator for a level 1 trauma hospital, and then made my way into politics.
And how did you make your way into politics?
I started out on the ground as a grassroots organizer here locally in Texas, and became one of the original founders of the Tea Party movement. which grew into a broader array of political activities at the local level, the state level, federal level, and then began to do larger events and electing congressmen, senators, and ultimately United States president.
And who was that United States president?
Donald John Trump.
How did you first become aware of Mr. Trump as a political figure?
Well, a little known fact about Mr. Trump is that he had spoken to Tea Party rallies about 5 years before he actually ran for president. So I've known about him for a while. I saw him in South Carolina in 2015 at the end of January, and I told him that I heard a rumor that he was thinking about running, and I told him then that if he did, I would help him if he could win. And that's how it all began.
And what happened next in terms of your involvement with his campaign?
Well, from there, I saw him a couple of times, and then over the summer, when he officially filed, he began calling me after my media appearances. I had been doing national television for about 7 years at that point. He would just call and thank me for the support, ultimately asking me to join his 2016 campaign as a spokesperson. So I officially joined the team in 2015 as one of the Trump originals.
So you served as the campaign spokesman for the first Trump campaign, is that correct?
That's correct, the national spokesperson.
And did you serve in that role through the election?
I did, yes.
Did you then enter the administration in any capacity?
I did not. I was offered deputy press secretary, but decided to stay out to help the president's outside super PAC before being called into the re-election campaign.
In what capacity did you join the re-election campaign?
Just as senior advisor, I helped to oversee comms, media, coalitions.
And what do you mean by coalitions?
Coalitions is basically grassroots, different organizations and entities that have a common purpose typically get together for one cause, and we call those coalitions.
Did you have any responsibility for vetting people who wanted to be officially associated with the campaign?
There was actually a process for vetting because each coalition, the bigger ones, had boards, and individuals who wanted to be formally associated with the campaign had to go through a vetting process to serve on one of those boards. The vetting process did not extend outside those boards, but to those who were officially associated with the campaign did have to go through vetting.
And what was the purpose of vetting people who wanted to be officially associated with the campaign?
Well, in politics, every group has their what we call fringe, and a lot of them seem to come out in the movement, many for their own purposes. And we just needed to make sure that we weren't elevating those people in official capacities. So we were very tight on our vetting process for members who were officially associated with the campaign.
Can you stop those people from supporting the candidate?
No, I wish we could.
Well, what can you do?
Well, all you can do is to, to make sure that that they are not formally associated or affiliated. If they are, we take measures to even issue a cease and desist at some point, or if you catch them, using the name, whether it's on TV or social media, you take the steps to call a producer and say this person is affiliated with us, please don't associate them with us. You go out of your way to try and prevent them from taking, any platform or stage with any of your principles.
Is it easy to police the people who are affiliated with the campaign?
It's easy when you have a set system in place. Typically in a campaign there are processes and protocols in place. And you catch everything all the time? No, but it is specifically designed for that reason, just to make sure that you are protecting your principles.
So what did you do after the 2020 election?
I went home. I went home back to Texas. I had just lost an aunt to my mother's only sister. I hadn't seen my family in several years, so I had gone home.
What did you do for a living at that point?
Well, at that point, they were still challenging some of the results, waiting for recounts and such. So through the remainder of December, I was still advising communications coalitions and such for the campaign. But I do have my own media company where I do engage with press and communications as well as broadcast television.
In that connection, did you do any work for a group called Women for America First?
I did not do any work for them. I did know them, and they reached out to me with some of the grievances that they were having during their planning of continued protests.
What is the group Women for America First?
That's a group that's run by Amy Kramer, with the help of her daughter, Amy Kramer, and I've known them for more than a decade, and that's one of the reasons why they reached out to me with their grievances.
Was that one of the fringe groups that you worked to keep away from the president and his campaign?
No, in fact, it's quite the opposite. As I mentioned, I've worked with them for years. They're pros. I knew they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, and I trusted that they would continue to be pros, and which is likely why they reached out to me for help.
Were they part of something, strike that. Was their group part of what has sometimes been called the Stop the Steal movement?
So it depends on how you're asking that question, if I may. There was a hashtag with Stop the Steal that was made up of a much broader coalition of really anybody who wanted to participate. And then there was a separate physical entity called Stop the Steal, that was an organization run by Ali Alexander. So I would say that they were part of the broader coalition hashtag group, but not the actual Stop the Steal organization.
Did everybody in the broader coalition get along, tend to agree with each other?
No. Anytime you're dealing with grassroots, any professional will tell you it's like herding cats. And no, they were essentially fighting each other, and it was pretty intense.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there's different ways to approach what was happening at the time. There were a lot of people were upset. There were emotions involved, and some groups were using more inflammatory rhetoric than others. For example, you have the Ali Alexander LGN faction, who are typically known for being over the top in their rhetoric, whether it be conspiracy or just outright chaos. And then you have those on the Kramer side who were just wanting to follow the constitutional process, which is what we've done forever, and encourage people to do what they can in their states, to talk to their legislatures. There was even some discussion about some of the states having recall statutes, actually following the process as given to its 5 founders.
Did the Kramer's group, Women for America First, create something called the March for Trump?
Yes, that was their, so let me back up a little bit, because this broader coalition that was fighting with each other, the Kramers then decided to split off from that group because they were just out of control, and they went on their own path in their bus tours, because that's what they had done for years, and their bus tour was called March for Trump.
Where geographically was that bus tour located?
I wouldn't know. There was a schedule, I recall, just going across the country, but I don't recall. You may have it.
I didn't mean specific. What I was going for, was it sort of a nationwide or across the country thing?
Yes, it was across the country.
And was it your understanding that it was supposed to culminate in a, I guess, a demonstration at the Ellipse on January 6th?
Yes, that's correct. They did 2 previous events the same way, except the Ellipse was not part of the process of the first 2 events that they held.
Did Ms. Kramer or the Kramers ask you to help out with the January 6th event in any way?
So when I was speaking to the Kramers, it was more of them filling me in on what had been going on, what's happening, less of helping. I wasn't asked to help really until Caroline Wren had reached out to me after the fact and asked to help, because she didn't feel like she was receiving the support that she needed.
Who was Caroline Wren?
Caroline Wren is a fundraiser. She was a fundraiser for Republicans, and she was fundraising for President Trump at the time.
And what was the issue that she brought up with you?
She had grievances with the Kramers. She insisted that they weren't being team players. She was very upset with them. She knew that I knew them personally, so she reached out to me to see if I could help sort of mediate what she was trying to do.
And what was Ms. Wren trying to do?
Well, initially she said that they were blocking her speakers from talking and not wanting to work together, just being complicated and difficult. And then when I spoke to the Kramers about that, they informed me that the people that she wanted to work with were the Ali Alexanders in those group. So when I reached out to Caroline, I agreed with the Kramers, and I told her that it's a non-starter.
And by a non-starter, what do you mean?
Meaning that these 2 groups were not going to be working together. And the problem was there were so many people who wanted to speak. And the Kramers had permits for January 5th and 6th. So in an attempt to try and quell all the chaos in a very diplomatic way, working with Caroline Wren, who was representing her people, and Kramer and Kylie, who were representing their people, came to an agreement to split up those days so that everybody had an opportunity to exercise their constitutional rights.
Was President Trump expected, or at least be considered, was there an expectation or hope that President Trump would speak at the event on the Ellipse on the 6th?
I think it's always a hope and an expectation when you're in D.C. at that time to at least see President Trump. And the fact that he flew over one of the rallies and drove past another, I think it was fair for people to want to see him in some capacity, but not necessarily to speak until he actually tweeted about it.
And when was that?
I don't recall the specific date.
And so if I understand what you're saying, the dates were split up with the Kramers and their group getting one date, which was the 6th, and Ms. Wren and her group getting the 5th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And which date did the president decide he was going to speak on?
On January 6th.
So the president announced that he would be speaking to the Kramer group. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what was the reaction among the other group that you thought, well, what was the reaction among the other faction?
Well, they were very upset, but as soon as he tweeted that he was going to see you there, I just told everyone involved that whatever they were planning was not happening. We just needed to figure out, what capacity he was going to be, if he was going to be speaking. I didn't know at that point what was happening, but I told everybody that if the president is now going to be involved, then everybody's plans are scrapped. The people who were moved to the 5th did not take it very well, primarily because Caroline continued to let them believe that they were going to be speaking on the 6th, and because they've been tweeting and posting pictures talking about sharing the stage with the president. So I knew that she was misleading the people that were moved to the 5th, so it's fair to say that they were not happy.
And what about the people on the 6th? What was the situation with them?
Well, it was very similar because I could not guarantee anyone a spot on the president's stage because, again, once the president is involved in an event, it becomes his event. And I expressed that to the Kramers as well. They were a little, hurt about it because they had their own people who've been very supportive of the president who wanted to speak. And I just could not guarantee that they were going to be able to speak. So they were a little disheartened because everybody wanted to, share with the president that day. But they understood because that's just how it is when the president is involved, and they just waited for instruction.
So did you take it upon yourself to try to vet the group that would be appearing on the 6th at this point?
Well, at that point, as soon as I learned that Caroline wanted to put Alex Jones, Holly Alexander, Roger Stone on the stage on the 6th, I immediately began raising red flags because she was telling me that this was approved, it was fine, and I knew that couldn't have been right, so my initial response was to call the chief of staff.
When you say the chief of staff, what do you mean?
Mark Meadows.
And what did you tell did you reach out to Mr. Meadows?
I did. I texted him and asked him to call me because I felt like things were getting a little out of hand.
And approximately when was this?
That was, again, I don't recall the specific date, but it was maybe January 2nd or 3rd, somewhere in there.
Okay, and what was your concern at this point?
Well, at this point, she had led me to believe that somebody in the White House had approved that, and I couldn't accept that. So I reached out to the chief of staff to raise that flag, and he did call me, and I expressed to him my concerns about it, and then I was shocked because he, first of all, didn't even know who Caroline Wren was, and then told me that no one had been spoken to about January 6th, and he hadn't approved anything, and so I was a little taken back by that. And that's when he asked me to just take this thing over to make sure that it goes off well, and that's when I got more formally involved.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this correctly. So you'd seen indications that Ms. Wren was announcing or telling people that her people would be appearing on the stage with President Trump on the 6th. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
And you thought that was not acceptable? Is that right?
It was not acceptable because she even leaked it to a conservative media outlet that actually ran her list of people. I even tried to get them to retract it, but they refused.
And your understanding is that she was telling the media and others that this had been approved by the White House?
Yes.
And that was what led you to contact Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, is that right?
That's correct.
And that was on or around the 2nd, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so Mr. Meadows responded, if I understand you correctly, by saying that nobody at the White House approved this to his knowledge, and he asked you to step in and sort things out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what did you do?
Well, I went into, I guess I call it campaign mode at that point. The chief of staff had asked me to take it over, and that's exactly what I did. I told everyone, meaning Caroline Wren and Amy Kramer and their group, to tell everyone that no one is speaking. We tried to get together and come up with a reasonable list to submit to the White House. And Caroline just kept pushing for people that I think were appropriate. And then when she kept pushing, and I told her to tell me who approved this at the White House, because I told her that I was going to call the White House. She had mentioned that Scavino did. So I was very upset with Dan Scavino. I just couldn't believe that he would approve something like that. So I reached out to the chief of staff once again and said, I'm done. I said, I'm not going to participate in embarrassing the president, and I'm just out. And when I told him that she said that Scavino approved it, he said, well, then you should probably reach out to Dan. And that's what I did. I reached out to Dan and found out that that was also a lie. And then I felt bad for getting mad at Dan Scavino.
Well, let me just back up for a moment. Who was Dan Scavino?
Dan Scavino, I think at that point was deputy chief of staff. He was doing social media for the president, but I think there at the end he was deputy chief of staff.
Okay. So you were being told by Caroline Wren that her people were being approved by the White House, and you initially thought that there might be some truth to that, so you reached out to Mr. Meadows. Is that right?
Yes.
And you thought Dan Scavino was the person that was approving this?
That's correct.
And Mr. Meadows put you in contact with Mr. Scavino. Is that right?
Well, he asked me to reach out to Dan, and I reached out to Dan. Yes.
Okay. And when was that?
That was either the 2nd or the 3rd. This was all happening very quickly in a matter of a couple of days. So all of this happened around the 2nd and 3rd and 4th.
Okay. So if the 3rd was a Sunday, would have been the Sunday or the Monday that you talked with Mr. Scavino?
I believe it would have been Sunday because when he told me with all certainty that just was not true and he hadn't heard anything from anyone, he suggested that I meet the president the following day, which would have been that Monday before he left for the Georgia rally.
Okay, and where were you when you had this conversation with Mr. Scavino?
At home in Texas. I was really bedridden because I had hurt my back. My knee was cutting up the face.
So did you go to Washington D.C. on the Monday?
I did. I managed to get on a flight that next morning. I felt like it was important enough to actually sit down with the president to find out exactly what he expected to come from the rally on the 6th. And so I flew right in and went to a meeting.
Okay. Now, if Mr. Meadows and Mr. Scavino, well, let me ask you this. Did you express your concerns about these speakers to Mr. Meadows and Mr. Scavino?
Oh, absolutely. I expressed my concerns to anyone who listened.
Okay. What did you tell Mr. Meadows and Mr. Scavino were your concerns about these speakers?
I think Alex Jones, in itself is a problem. I believe I sent either some tweets or some articles where there was some incendiary language that Ollie Alexander was specifically using. I had seen some video clips of some of the previous rallies or protests that he was speaking at. It was very inflammatory as well. So I just sort of listed off a couple of my concerns, and they just agreed with me, and it's a problem. And then that's why Dan was like, just come to the president and figure out what he wants. And the primary reason you do that is because once the president makes a decision, it's done. At least that's how it should be.
Okay. And just, I got your concerns with some individual speakers, but more generically, what was your concern about having the kind of speakers you disapproved of on the stage with the president?
So I mentioned before that there were 2 previous events leading up to the one January 6th. The Kramers had informed me that there were issues. For example, there were media reports after the first, I think they called it the million MAGA, whatever they called it, and there were reports of fights or violence that had been there. We had just spent several years of Trump supporters being attacked. Then there was also a situation regarding Alex Jones himself, who tried to rush the stage at one of their previous events, and my concern was whether they tried to cause any problems, or these guys don't care. They want attention. They want notoriety. They just want chaos. And I was just concerned with emotions being high, the number of people that were likely going to be there, that we need to be on alert.
So, if I understand you correctly, you just wanted to keep these kind of troublemakers off the stage with the president. Is that what I'm understanding?
Not only did I not want them on the stage, I didn't want them anywhere around. I just think that those actors were really bad actors. They're in this for their own personal selfish reasons, and they just don't care about the damage that they caused. Turns out I was right.
Okay. So you'd had this discussion with Mr. Meadows, and did he share your concerns?
He did. I think that's why he told me to just take it over.
Okay.
It was just too much to deal with at that point. So.
And you had a similar discussion with Mr. Scavino, is that correct?
That's correct.
And did he share your concerns?
He did, yes.
And so did he help you set up a meeting with the president for the next day?
Yes, Dan set me up to go to the president that afternoon, the following afternoon.
Okay. So where was the meeting you had with the president?
It was in the president's dining room, which was right off the Oval Office.
Okay, and about what time was that?
That was probably around 3:30. So I know he was leaving for the Georgia rally after the meeting.
Okay, and about how long did that meeting last?
Maybe a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. I think I was out of there by 4, so.
Okay, can you describe the scene?
It's a small room with a long table. There are 2 entries coming into the president's dining room, one from the Oval, one from the hallway. And the president was sitting at the head of the table, working on papers, getting orders, just making calls. I came in and sat to his right. So the entry from the Oval Office and the hallway were out of my field of vision because I was facing him at the head of the table. Then at that point, Max Miller had come and sat across from me. He had come in through the hallway door, so I turned and saw him. I knew they were getting ready to go to the rally. And then there's just people that come in and out, whether they're bringing the president something or picking up something to finish off for the day.
Okay. Who were the main participants in the meeting?
Myself, the president, and Max Miller sat across from me. We were the only ones at the table. Occasionally people would come in through the hallway and make comments. I don't remember who all came through. It was just a typical day of plans.
Okay. Who was Max Miller?
Max Miller worked for Advance for the president. I don't know his title there at the end, though.
Okay. And if I understand what you've been saying earlier, from your perspective, the purpose of the meeting was to get the president's input on who he wanted at the event on the 6th, and what kind of event he wanted. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Did you come in there with, I don't know, an agenda, talking points, anything like that?
I did make an agenda for the meeting just to make sure that I covered the points that I wanted to cover. Anytime you meet with the president, you can get off topic and talk about other things. So it was my way of having my little bullets to make sure that I was able to communicate clearly what I thought.
Did you wind up using that set of talking points in that meeting?
I didn't use all of the talking points. I used it as a guide in our discussion, but I did express my concerns.
Okay. And what was the president's reaction to your expression of concern?
Well, it actually was not as difficult as I thought, because I thought I was going to have to run through everything. I didn't have to, because the moment that I showed him a list of people that wanted to speak, he just didn't want everybody to speak. And so before I could even get to my concerns, he had already essentially nixed everyone from the list, including his family. So that told me, as someone who knows him and his mind and his heart, that he was looking for more of an official event. So it was more of a hybrid of an official event. He was speaking at ballots on White House grounds as the president, but he still wanted a rally feel because he just wanted to use it so people could sing and dance and be happy like a rally. So it just turned into a hybrid event, which actually made me relieved.
So did you discuss with him any of the people that you were specifically concerned about?
I did. I waited till the end because he himself looked through the list and just ultimately decided that he didn't want anybody to speak. So by the end, he just decided that the permit holder could speak, I could introduce them. He wanted elected officials to speak. Again, that official feel of that part of his event. And then at the end, he just seemed shocked that everybody wanted to speak. And I just had to keep explaining to him, of course, everybody wants to be on your stage. And so at the end, I could ask him specifically if he wanted Rudy Giuliani. He said no, he needs preparing. I said, did you want Roger Stone? And he said no. And I asked, do you want Ali Alexander? And his response was who? So he didn't even know who all he was at that point. And I never brought up Alex Jones because, again, that was just a non-starter. That was just my way of confirming that Caroline was in line, and I was just relieved now that I had the president's decision that I can now take back to everyone and hopefully shut it all down.
Okay. So what else was discussed during this meeting?
After that, he asked me if people were going to the Capitol, because the previous marches he wasn't aware of, and he was kind of frustrated that nobody had told him about the previous marches, because wherever his people are, he wants to be there. That's just something that's always been a thing for him, even when he was initially assigned Secret Service. I remember the first couple of times he just walked straight to the crowd to take pictures and selfies and sign autographs. Secret Service had a heart attack. So, he did the flyover and drive-by the first two. This time he expressed, wanting to speak to them and asked me if they were going to the Capitol. I let him know that there were some groups that were going to the Capitol. They've been planning to go to the Capitol. And I told him there were some that weren't, but one thing that both groups agreed on is they wanted to see him. And he said, well, are we expecting any trouble? And I said, well, there have been some incidents at some of the previous rallies. And he said, well, we should call the National Guard. And Max Miller said, well, we should only call the National Guard if we expect a problem. And he said, no, we need to call the Guard to make sure there isn't a problem. And then he looked up and said, let's get 10,000 National Guard. And I don't know who was standing behind me, but he was speaking to somebody. He was, let's just have 10,000 National Guard, and that way we won't have any problems.
Did you give any testimony to the January 6th Select Committee?
I did, yes. I spent a total of probably around 19 to 20 hours through interviews as well as testimony.
Did you give public testimony?
I did not.
So it was in private session?
Yes, that's correct.
During your interviews and the private session, did you discuss the matters we talked about today?
Yes.
Did you talk specifically about your meeting with the president?
Absolutely, yes.
Did you talk about his willingness and decision to exclude problematic speakers from the event on the Ellipse?
Sustained.
Did you talk about your discussion with him about excluding people like Ali Alexander from the speaker list?
Did I discuss it with the committee?
Yes.
Yes.
Sustained. Try to not ask any questions.
Did you talk about about his mentioning 10,000 National Guard troops?
Leading.
Sustained. I didn't ask her what she talked about.
Well, well, I've already asked, did she testify about the matters we discussed today, and she said yes, so I guess that covers that. Did the committee call you to testify at any public hearing?
No.
To your knowledge, does the committee's report include any of the information you provided about those topics in its findings?
Not to my knowledge.
I have no further questions for you this time. Thank you.
Ms. Pierson, we are going to take a break, so can you make sure you're available then in 15 minutes at 4:10 in Colorado?
Yes, Your Honor.
So we're getting all sorts of complaints, like I have in control, that people can't hear on C-SPAN. So, but I have trouble hearing you, Mr. Shaw, so if everybody can try to speak up. I think the issue is that maybe only the lawyers are on target for the phone, but anyway, we'll do what we can do. Are you still there, Ms. Pearson?
Yes, Your Honor, I'm here.
Great, so you're still on the oath, and it looks like you should be able to see Mr. Olson, is that correct?
Which ones? Yes.
He'll be asking,
Yes.
he'll be asking you questions, okay?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Ms. Pierson.
Good afternoon.
I want to talk with you about, you mentioned a couple times Ali Alexander and Alex Jones. Do you sometimes refer to them as the crazies?
I absolutely do.
Okay. And you know that, you said that Trump likes the crazies, right?
Yes, and I also defined crazies as being those who viciously defend him in public.
Right. Which includes Alex Jones and Ali Alexander, right?
You can put them in that group, I suppose.
Great. Now, Trump went on Alex Jones' radio show shortly after he announced his candidacy for president, right?
I don't know.
Okay. Trump gave Alex Jones a VIP pass to his selection at the Republican National Committee, or at the Republican Convention when he was the Republican nominee, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. But you still have a great deal of loyalty to Trump, don't you?
Define loyalty.
Well, you would never betray him, would you?
Well, I wouldn't betray anyone.
You call yourself one of the believers, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everybody on the 2016 primary campaign were the believers.
Okay.
Yes.
And you view your job in that role as protecting the president, right?
I can protect your principal regardless of who it is, yes.
Yeah, so your job is to protect, you view your job is to protect the president, right?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk about this claimed conversation about the National Guard. Now, was Kash Patel in that conversation?
No.
Okay. Was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in that conversation?
No.
Was Mark Meadows in that conversation?
No.
Was any senior leadership from the Department of Defense in that conversation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. But Max Miller was in that conversation, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that day that you and Max Miller killed the National Guard, right?
That is incorrect.
Let me show you a tweet or a text message exchange between you and Mr. Miller. Plaintiff's Exhibit 265, Your Honor. Whoops. I need to share my screen first. I'm sorry, Ms. Pierson.
I've got nothing but time.
And I guess I need permission to share my screen. Thank you very much.
We're getting better at this as we proceed, so.
I'm still getting the same message. Yes. Do you see on the screen, Ms. Pierson, a text of Monday, January 4th, 4:08 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. And if we go down to the bottom, you can see, and I'll call it out so you can see it, there's a GPO stamp saying it's authorized, authenticated U.S. government information. Do you see that?
Yes.
And I'll represent you. This is from Mr. Miller's phone that he turned over as part of the January 6th investigation. And you'll see at the top, so Monday, January 4th, you see that?
Yes.
And then because, do you have an iPhone? Do you know how it works, the text colors?
Yes.
Okay, so if this is from his phone, your statements are on the left in gray and his are on the right in blue, right?
Correct.
Okay, so he says to you, you did a great job killing some of those speakers, what you talked about earlier, right?
Correct.
And now let's go down. and you say, hallelujah, praise the Lord Jesus, amen. Mr. Miller says, haha, crushed it, but man, he thinks 1 million people are coming, right? You had that exchange?
Yes, I see it.
And then you say, I tried to help manage expectations. And then he says, and I'll highlight it here, you did, and just glad we killed the National Guard. You see that?
I see that.
And then you heart emojied that statement, right?
Yes.
You didn't say, no, we didn't, did you?
No.
You just said, didn't get a picture,
Yes.
right? And then this text exchange goes on for a little bit. We'll come back to it in a little bit. But now I want to turn to the security concerns that you mentioned in your direct testimony. But I was kind of surprised because I didn't hear you say that the security concerns you were worried about were risks to Trump supporters. That was your security concern, wasn't it?
That was one of my concerns, yes.
Well, in your interview with the January 6th committee, which that transcript is made public, right? You know that.
That's correct.
No one's keeping it a secret, are they?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. The only security concern you mentioned was security concerns to Trump supporters, right?
I believe I mentioned concerns generally, but when they asked for an example, that is one that I gave.
Well, let's look at that, Ms. Pierson. I'm going to pull up your interview that you had with representative of the January 6th committee, this public interview. Now, but before I do that, before you did that, you knew that it was unlawful to provide false information to Congress, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So you're under oath here today. You had a similar obligation at that time, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm pulling up page 124 of Exhibit 264, and I'm going to bring the screen out. Is that big enough for you to read?
Yes, it is.
So the question that you were asked was, talk about the National Guard. It says, what specifically did you tell the president or Mr. Miller about security concerns that you had for that day, for the day, right? You see that?
Yes.
And then if we go down, you have 2 paragraphs of answers. And you talk about some physical assaults there were, conflicts between Black Lives Matter and those other guys. I don't even remember who they all were. Countless reports of people being attacked at some of these marches or rallies or whatever you want to call them. Now, are you referring here to the November and December rallies we talked about briefly?
Yes.
The ones where Trump either visited in a motorcade to express his support, and then the other one, he flew over in Marine One and did 2 laps, right? Around over the protest. And everyone in the protest thought that, yeah, everyone in the protest thought that was pretty great that the president expressed support that way, didn't they?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so going back to your answer, you say there was high potential that on top of all the previous encounters that specifically Trump supporters have run into with being attacked pretty much anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Did you identify any other concern, security concern, other than Trump supporters?
I spoke to the committee investigators on more than one occasion, so I expressed all of my concerns, yes.
Okay. That wasn't quite my question, Ms. Pierson. Are you telling us that there's a written record of you telling people under oath that you expressed concerns about the security of the Capitol?
I didn't have anything to do with Capitol, so I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking what you testified to. Have you ever testified under oath that, or being in trouble for lying like you are to Congress, that you had security concerns about the Capitol?
I had security concerns about the rally.
Okay. So that's a no. You've never told anyone that you had security concerns about the Capitol, did you?
I mentioned the bad actors who had previously caused concerns at other capitals, and why I was concerned generally and specifically. If you go to the next line where you highlighted, since I was concerned that people would come and try to start trouble, and that's my concern. That is a general concern.
Your Honor, move to strike is non-responsive. But can you? I want to ask a very simple question, Ms. Pierson. Have you ever testified that you had a security concern about the Capitol, where you mentioned the Capitol?
I don't recall specifically because my concerns were general.
Okay. Now, did the White House tell anyone publicly that Trump was going to call on people to march with him to the Capitol on the ellipse speech?
Did the White House say publicly that he was? I'm not aware.
Okay. In fact, you knew that Ms. Kramer did not have a permit to march to the Capitol, right?
That is correct.
And that because of that, if the National Park Service found out about a march to the Capitol, she would get in trouble, right?
That is what she expressed to me, yes.
Yeah. And in fact, you've never seen a permit to march to the Capitol, have you?
I'm not. I was not involved in the permitting process.
And you've never seen any written proof at the time that any agency outside of the White House knew of Trump's plan to tell the crowd to march to the Capitol, do you?
I'm not aware of the White House plans.
Okay. But you've never seen anything yourself?
No.
Okay. Now, I want to turn to events later in the day on January 6th. In the moment, what you said was Trump asked for a civil war, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, let's look at your text. And what I want to do, this is a text between you and Brad Parscale. It's Exhibit 263. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And you see the date here. I'll just highlight one. Is it big enough for you to read, by the way?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is January 6th in the evening, right?
Correct.
And it goes back and forth. I want to give a little context to make sure we get your text exactly right. Who is Mr. Parscale at this time?
He's the former 2020 campaign manager.
Right. But he had a pretty good idea of how Trump communicated to his supporters, right?
Objection.
I can't speak for Brad Parscale.
Well, Mr. Trump put him in charge of his campaign, right?
Actually, he fired Brad Parscale.
Well, a lot of people have been fired by Mr. Trump, but at some point, Mr. Trump put Mr. Parscale in charge of his campaign, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so what Mr. Parscale says to you on January 6th is that was a sitting president asking for a civil war, right? That's what he says.
That's what he says.
And then you talk about, you say Lincoln actually suspended habeas corpus, and it's kind of hard to follow the thread because it looks like you're each texting to each other. This happens to all of us, right? You're texting while someone else is responding, so it doesn't always match up. But I want to make sure you see the full exchange. A sitting president asking for a civil war. You respond, this one, and then you say Lincoln actually suspended habeas corpus. And then Mr. Parscale says, well, he better be right. And then let's turn to see what you say on the next page. You say, he asked for a civil war. You see that?
Do you see what I said after that? Don't over-dramatize.
Right, but you said he asked for a civil war, right?
Responding to Brad Parscale, yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Now, we can all agree that President Lincoln never asked for a civil war, did he?
Did he ask for it, or did he actually do it?
Asked for it.
I don't know. I wasn't around back in Lincoln.
Okay, but the he you're referring to right here, when you say he asked for civil war, that is Trump, right? What you're saying is Trump asked for a civil war, right?
No, what I'm saying is Brad was over-dramatizing by saying he asked for a civil war. You have to read the entire text.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Well, you're not doing it because you stop at he asked for a civil war and completely ignore the rest of the text in that line.
I'm just putting your words in context.
But you
Sir,
can't put my words in context.
excuse me, Ms. Pearson. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure we're efficient. And I'm showing everyone your text. We're talking about your whole text. If there's anything else you want me to show, I'm happy to do it. But you said on January 6th, he asked for a civil war. Don't over-dramatize, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In his text.
Now, also on January 6th, while the insurrection was underway, you knew full well that the mob's purpose was to come for the Capitol, right?
I don't know that I would know their purpose. I wasn't in on their plans.
Well, you said...
Pretty clear watching it unfold what was happening.
Right, but you said on January 6th that the mob came for the Capitol, right?
And do you have that to show me?
Sure.
I need to see the context.
This is Exhibit 258, Your Honor. And this is text with you and Taylor Budowich. And I'm pronouncing that name right? Can you pronounce it so I get it right?
Yes, that's right.
Budowich?
That's right.
Okay. And you're texting back and forth during the insurrection on January 6th, right?
During the protest, that's correct.
And Taylor at 2:08 says to you, get out of the city. Night is going to be tough. You see that?
I do see that, yes.
And then you respond, there's another text on the next page, but the first part of your text is, I don't think they'll riot. And then you say, they came for the Capitol. Do you see that?
And then I say, so crazy.
Yeah.
Yes, I see it.
And then I want to talk about a text exchange you had with Mr. Miller. And within 24 hours of these events occurring, and you knew pretty quickly that police officers were injured and someone had been killed, right, in this attack on the Capitol?
I didn't know until it was reported.
But you knew that day, right, like most Americans, that someone had been killed.
Yes, later that evening.
Okay. And so the next day, after you knew that someone had been killed and many police officers had been injured, you were making jokes about the insurrection, weren't you?
I don't recall.
Well, let's look at what you said.
So surreal.
This is back on your text exchange with Mr. Miller. And if we see here, again, you're in gray on the left, and this is a picture that you sent where you say definitely not a Trump supporter, no chance. Now I want to talk about the exchange on January 7th in the morning, right? So the morning after the Capitol was attacked, you sort of posted a meme, right? 2020 is finally over. That was the craziest year ever. 2021. But wait, there's more. And remind me that guy. That's an infomercial guy. Bob somebody, what's his name?
I don't remember his name, but yes.
But he's the guy that sells you stuff on late night TV, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what you said, unprompted, to Mr. Miller. And then the next day, or sorry, the text consider exchanges, and he says never too soon. And then you send a picture of someone carrying out a Capitol. You say, you have to admit that seeing Nancy Pelosi's lectern being carried away by a Trump supporter is pretty damn funny, right?
Yes, it was hysterical.
And this was less than 24 hours after our Capitol had been attacked after a speech by Mr. Trump, right?
That's correct.
No further questions.
Mr. Shaw, do you want to redirect?
No, Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Pierson. You are released.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Actually, Your Honor, can we move in a couple of data? I'm sorry. It's the text exchange is exhibit 265 and 263.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
263 and 265 are admitted.
Your Honor, our next witness is Amy Kramer. I had to get my head around it. And she's on the East Coast. She is available now if you would like to proceed, but she would prefer to go first thing in the morning because it's now 6:30 her time.
And do you have another?
Oh no, she would be we would be breaking if we did not bring her up. Call her now.
We have a pretty long witness list, and I just want to make sure that we're going to wrap up and take into account that Mr. Keefe also needs to testify. So I'm willing to go to 5:30 as planned, but I don't want to be told tomorrow or Friday that we're not going to finish because we're breaking early on a bunch of days.
Your Honor, I understand. We think we'll be able to finish by then, but if you're concerned about it, I do not mind putting her on now.
I really leave it to you because I have no idea how long it will take.
So can you just give me 2 minutes and I'll get back to you? Okay. I just want to confirm with Mr. Gessler since he is lead counsel, but I'm pretty sure he's fine with this, but let me check.
Okay.
Can you hang up on?
Your Honor, go off the record for a moment.
I'm not sure what that means, given that we're on TV, but okay.
That was my final witness, so I've got work to do back at the...
Oh, please.
But I do want to thank you for your courtesy and allowing me to appear before you for the HA.
Oh, you're glad for the
I am not, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Your Honor, we're not concerned about finishing. We should be able to finish the 4 fact witnesses tomorrow that we have left. Kramer, Bjorklund, Vine, thank you, Fline, and Buck, Congressman Buck. And then that should be easily done tomorrow. And then on Friday, we expect to have our expert in the morning, and we would be done at that point.
Okay, I'm sorry, you said Fine, Brooklyn, Buck, and
Kramer.
Kramer. So are you not calling Congressman Niels?
No, we're not. We actually have. We're not going to be calling Congressman Niels, and we're not calling Mr. Van der Veen.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds like we should be in
Yeah.
shape then.
Yeah, I think we'll be in fine shape.
Okay. So we will recess for the day and reconvene tomorrow at 8 a.m.
Thank you, Your Honor.